Starting off this countdown, we have the Man in the Iron Mask. The Man in the Iron Mask is the name given to an unidentified prisoner arrested in 1669 or 1670. He was imprisoned during the reign of King Louis XIV of France. Now, what's so scary about this prisoner is how his identity was always kept unknown. He was forced to wear a mask that blocked off his face. Some say he wore a black velvet mask, while others reported that it was a full-on iron mask. Apparently, the guards were ordered to shoot this man if he ever removed the mask. On top of that, he was kept in solitary confinement with double doors. He spent the rest of his life there until he died on November 19th, 1703. Moving on to number 9, we have Jesse Pomeroy. Jesse Pomeroy, otherwise known as the Boston Boy Fiend or the Boy Torturer, was convicted of countless murders at the age of 14 in 1875. He would abuse, torture, and then kill his victims. In fact, he was the youngest person in the history of Massachusetts to be convicted of first-degree murder. When Jesse was caught, he admitted to the murders and was sentenced to live in the Westboro Boys Reform School until he was 18. However, while at the school, he went on to commit other murders. That's when he was sentenced to prison and was placed in solitary confinement. His only interactions were with his guard and his mom, who would visit him once a month. In our 8th spot, we have Ian Manuel. In 1990, when Ian Manuel was only 13 years old, he shot a woman in the face, blowing out part of her jaw during a robbery. Thankfully, she survived, but as a result of his crime, he was tried and convicted as an adult. As a result, he was sentenced to 65 years in prison. He was one of the youngest inmates in the Tampa State Penitentiary. Manuel spent 15 plus years in isolation, making him the longest serving inmate in solitary confinement in Florida. Eventually, he was released after the woman he shot actually fought for his freedom, claiming everyone does dumb things when they're young, and she didn't want him to waste his life in jail. In our 7th spot, we have Ian Brady. Between 1963 and 1965, Ian Brady and his accomplice tortured, abused, and killed 5 individuals. They would bury their bodies on the moors outside of Manchester, which gave them the name the Moors Murderers. The crimes they committed were horrific, and Brady expressed no remorse. As a result, he was held in solitary confinement. His only contact with the outside world was through letters. It's said that on his free time he would memorize whole pages of Shakespeare and Plato and then recite them to himself. He would also often interact with television programs. Brady died in prison on May 15th, 2017 at the age of 79. Making our way down the list, number 6, we have Dennis Rader. Between the years of 1974 to 1991, American serial killer Dennis Rader took the lives of 10 individuals. In 2005, he was convicted for his crimes, and now he's facing 175 years in solitary confinement without the possibility of parole. Now, Dennis likes to go by the name BTK, or the BTK Strangler, which stands for Bind 'em, Torture 'em, and Kill 'em. So that says a lot about who this guy is. But thankfully, he is locked away and has no chance of escaping. To this day, Dennis is considered one of the most diabolical serial killers in American history. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with John Massey. In 1975, John Massey got into a fight with a pub's bouncer and he shot him in the chest. At the age of 26, he was sentenced to life for murder. But while in prison, Massey managed to successfully escape 3 times. His most notorious escape was when he made a makeshift rope out of sheets and a pair of heavy-duty gloves to climb over the prison wall. As a result of his escapes, he was placed in solitary confinement. He was allowed 15 minutes outside of his cell each day, and had only 8 minutes for a phone call. Other than that, he was kept locked away. He is considered one of Britain's longest serving prisoners. He was eventually released after spending nearly 43 years behind bars. In our 4th spot, we have Thomas Silverstein. Thomas Edward Silverstein was an American criminal jailed for armed robbery in 1978. But while in prison, he committed numerous other crimes. In 1983, he killed a prison officer who he stabbed multiple times. Then he murdered 2 inmates. As a result, he had to be detained in a specially designed cell at the ADX Florence Federal Penitentiary in Colorado. Due to the crimes he committed while in jail, he is considered the most violent prisoner in America. He is also referred to as America's most isolated man. Now, Silverstein was considered so dangerous that he got transferred to a federal prison in Atlanta. There he was confined in a 6 by 7 foot cell. He was constantly under surveillance. In fact, the lights in his cell were never turned off so that they could always keep an eye on him. Silverstein eventually died in prison at the age of 67. He is said to have served the longest term in solitary confinement in the federal penitentiary system. Coming in at number 3, we have Eileen Wuornos. Eileen Wuornos, often referred to as the Damsel of Death, was found guilty of killing 7 men. She claimed it was self-defense, but then later pleaded guilty to the murders. She would murder them, rob them, and then drive home in their cars. Due to this, she was named America's first female serial killer. Now, Eileen was placed in solitary confinement for quite some time, but then she started to grow paranoid. She thought that the people making her food were spitting in it, and then she also claimed that she was being attacked by a sonic weapon. As a result, she wanted the court to hurry up with her death sentence. On October 9, 2002, Eileen died by lethal injection. Moving on to number 2, we have Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth Bathory, otherwise known as the Countess who bathed in blood, was a serial killer in Hungary back in the 16th century. It's believed that she had killed around 650 girls. She's also considered the most vicious female serial killer in all recorded history. It's believed that her husband was a big influence in her killings. Apparently, he told her to torture her servants. He said for her to pour honey all over them and then let the bugs eat them. But her killings didn't truly start until she met a witch named Anna Darvula. This witch told Elizabeth that bathing in the blood of the young would help her maintain her youth. And that's exactly what she would do. Eventually, Elizabeth was sentenced to life in solitary confinement. She was locked up in her castle's torture chamber. The windows and doors were boarded up with her inside. There was only a small hole in which food was passed in through. On August 21st, 1611, she passed away. And in our number 1 spot, we have Robert Maudsley. Now, I've talked about Robert in my other video on dangerous criminals, and there's no way that I couldn't include him on this list. Robert Maudsley is considered Britain's most dangerous prisoner. Maudsley was originally convicted for 1 murder, however killed 3 more individuals in prison, which got him placed in solitary confinement. In 1977, Maudsley and his fellow inmate held another prisoner hostage. They ended up torturing him for 9 hours before cracking his head open and killing him. Now, it's rumored that he may have ate some of that prisoner's brain. As a result, he was deemed the real-life Hannibal Lecter. After that, he murdered 2 more inmates, which got him placed in solitary confinement. In fact, he is locked up in a glass cell underneath Wakefield Jail. He spends 23 hours of his day there. Starting off this countdown, we have Charles Victor Thompson. On April 30th, 1998, Charles Victor Thompson got in an argument with his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend. This argument left them both dead. As a result, he was sentenced to the death penalty. While waiting on death row, Charles actually managed to escape. In 2005, Charles escaped and spent 3 days on the run until he was found drunk at a payphone. He was then recaptured and placed into solitary confinement, where he waits until the day he receives the death penalty. Moving on at number 9, we have Charles Bronson. Charles Bronson was an English criminal who gained the title the most violent prisoner in Britain and Britain's most notorious prisoner. He was first arrested for armed robbery and served a 7-year sentence. Upon his release, he had a career in bare-knuckle boxing. Then, in 1988, he was convicted of conspiracy to commit another robbery. However, this time when he went back to jail, he became a more violent inmate. In fact, there were multiple times where he took inmates as hostages. He would even often fight guards and fellow prisoners. As a result, he was moved 120 times. That's right, you heard me correctly. Nowadays, he spends his time in solitary confinement, which he will probably remain until his death. In our 8th spot, we have Gary Ridgway. Gary Ridgway, otherwise known as the Green River Killer, was responsible for the murder of 48 women between 1980 and 1990. However, it's believed that he may have killed as many as 71 people. He then would dump the bodies along riverbanks in South King County, giving him the name the Green River Killer. He was arrested arrested in 2001 and given 48 life sentences. Since his conviction, Ridgway has lived in virtual isolation. He was initially going to receive the death penalty, but ended up trading information about his murders to get out of it. But even in solitary confinement, people still considered him a big threat. They feared that he was studying his surroundings and looking for weaknesses, planning to attack or to find a way out. In our 7th spot, we have Ivan Millay. Ivan Millay is considered Australia's most notorious serial killer. Between 1989 to 1993, Millay murdered 7 backpackers. He would pick them up off the side of the road, torture, kill, and then bury their bodies. As a result, he was given 7 life sentences. He spent these sentences in solitary confinement at Goulburn Supermax Prison. Prison officers say that on multiple occasions, Millay would try to escape. He would often bust his head open by banging it on his cell's wall so that he would get an external visit to the hospital and then try to escape from there. Another time he swallowed metal to get a trip to the hospital, and even once he tried to cut off his finger. He was considered a highly manipulative inmate with a high risk of self-harm. Millay spent 18 years in Supermax prison before he died of esophagus and stomach cancer. Moving on to number 6, we have Michael Swango. Michael Swango, aka the serial killer physician, poisoned over 60 of his patients, though he only admitted to causing 4 deaths. Michael Swango worked at multiple hospitals. At the first hospital, nurses began to become suspicious of him after healthy patients would mysteriously die. One nurse even caught him injecting medicine into a patient who then became ill. Michael then bounced around from hospitals, poisoning patients' food with arsenic or other poisons, or he would kill the patients by overdose of whichever drug the patient had been prescribed. In 2000, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms with no possibility of parole. He is currently serving this sentence at the ADX Florence Supermax prison. There, he is confined to a 12 by 7 foot concrete cell. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Richard Lee McNair. Richard Lee McNair received 2 life sentences after being convicted of murder, attempted murder, and burglary. In 1987, McNair murdered 1 man and shot a 2nd man 4 times during a robbery that went wrong. He is currently in ADX Florence in solitary confinement. Now, here's the thing. Richard managed to escape prison 3 different times. The first time was in 1988 when he used lip balm as a lubricant to slide his handcuffs off. Then in 1992 he escaped again. And in 2006, he escaped for the last time by mailing himself out of prison. As a result, that's why he was placed into Supermax prison and in solitary confinement. But to this day, he's known as a master escapist. Making our way down the list at number 4, we have Robert P. Hansen. Robert Hansen was an FBI agent that sold thousands of classified documents to the Soviet and Russian intelligences. These documents outlined US strategies with regards to nuclear wars, exposed developments in the military's weapons, and detailed aspects of US counterintelligence programs. His espionage was considered as possibly the worst intelligence disaster in US history. Robert pleaded guilty to 14 counts of espionage and 1 conspiracy to commit espionage. As a result, he was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms. He is now serving his time at the ADX Florence, where he is in solitary confinement. Now, the reason why he's in solitary confinement is because he knows way too much about highly classified materials. Therefore, he is locked away to prevent any of this information from getting further leaked. Robert will be in confinement until the day he dies. Coming in at number 3, we have Andrei Chikatilo. Andrei Chikatilo, otherwise known as the Butcher of Rostov or the Rostov Ripper, was responsible for the deaths of 56 individuals. He would lure people that he met at bus stops or train stations away to remote locations where he would then murder them. He also had cannibalistic tendencies and would eat certain parts of his victims. In 1990, he was finally caught for these heinous crimes. In fact, when he was arrested, he said that he couldn't live without murder. He compared it to a first love, calling it unforgettable. Andrei spent 2 years in solitary confinement awaiting his death penalty in 1994. Coming in at number 2, we have Ed Kemper. Ed Kemper, also known as Big Ed, is an American serial killer who killed 10 individuals. It all started back in 1964 when Ed killed his grandparents at the age of 15. He claimed that he killed them just to see what it felt like. As a result, he was locked away for 5 years. In 1969, he was released at the age of 21. But he didn't learn his lesson because he went on to murder 8 more individuals, one of them being his own mother. Eventually, he was convicted again and is now placed in solitary confinement. Ed is only allowed an hour of recreation a day and 3 showers every week. But Ed is apparently okay with this, since he said that he is happier in prison than he ever was as a free man. While in prison, he got the name Big Ed since he weighs around 300 pounds and is 6'9". This dude is massive. I don't know how he fits in that cell. And in our number 1 spot, we have Martin Bryant. Martin Bryant is responsible for one of the world's deadliest shooting sprees in Australia. He took the lives of 35 innocent individuals and injured 23 others. He was given 35 life sentences with no opportunity for parole. For the first 8 months in jail, he was held in a specially built suicide prevention cell. But now he is in solitary confinement. Back in 2010, a reporter visited Bryant and claimed, and I quote, "Bryant lives the most hideous existence imaginable. He is in solitary confinement, grossly obese, and not allowed to see anyone except immediate family. Apparently, because he is suicidal, he is often drugged up so that he won't harm himself." The reporter also stated that he was placed in solitary confinement because he loves hearing about himself and what he did. So solitary confinement is a way to deprive him of this. Starting off this countdown, we have Richard Reed. In 2003, Richard Reed was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences and 110 years with no parole. Reed, also known as the Shoe Bomber, attempted to detonate a shoe bomb in 2001 while aboard American Airlines Flight 63 that was going from Paris to Miami. In 2006, The Telegraph wrote an article detailing the life of Richard in solitary confinement. They said that for 23 hours of the day he was locked in his small cell. The cell is equipped with motion sensors, video cameras, and he has someone constantly monitoring him. Every half hour he is checked in on by the guards through a small window in his door. His meals are passed through a slot in the door and have to be eaten in the cell. That would drive me insane. I would not fare well in solitary confinement. And at number 9 we have Cabony Savage. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Cabony Savage is an American drug dealer and murderer. He has committed a number of crimes, but the one that landed him in solitary confinement was when he killed 6 family members in a firebombing. The family was the Colemans. Eugene Coleman was going to testify against Savage in a drug trial. As a result, he had Eugene's mother's home firebombed, which resulted in the death of 6 individuals, including Eugene. But he was convicted of murdering 12 people. As a result, he was given the death sentence. In fact, he is the first man from Philadelphia in modern history to receive a federal death sentence. Savage currently spends his days in solitary confinement waiting for his death penalty. Coming in at number 8, we have Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was sentenced to death in 2015 after he was responsible for the Boston Marathon bombing on April 15, 2013. The bombing resulted in the death of 3 people and injured around 280 others. He now spends his days in solitary confinement in ADX Florence until he receives his death penalty. But like the guard said, the death penalty is an easy way out of the crimes. Solitary confinement is the real hard punishment. Making our way down the list at number 7, we have Barry Mills. Barry Mills lived a life of crime. He was incarcerated at a young age, and from there he grew to be a brutal leader of a prison gang. This gang was huge across prisons. It resulted in numerous prison wars. In fact, he was still actively recruiting members while behind bars. Being placed into solitary confinement couldn't even stop this. Barry was placed into solitary confinement in 2002 after being one of the 40 people charged with committing 32 murders. This gave him the name the Vengeful Killer killer. Now, Barry is a pretty terrifying looking inmate. He would always wear dark sunglasses because his eye got damaged in a prison fight. Barry spent his time in solitary confinement until 2018 when he passed away. Moving on to number 6, we have Joseph Duncan. Joseph Edward Duncan III was responsible for the kidnapping and deaths of the Grown family. In 2005, Joseph went on a frenzy, stalking the Grown family for days before finally attacking. He killed 4 out of the 5 family members, but he is responsible for the death of many others. As a result, he was given the death penalty and is currently living in solitary confinement until the day he dies. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Joseph Lombardo. Joseph Patrick Lombardo, otherwise known as Joey the Clown, was a loan shark, hitman, and mobster. This guy had a life of crime. He started off as a jewel thief, then moved on to kidnapping, illegal gambling, and loan sharking. But none of those things got him placed into solitary confinement. In 2009, he was sentenced to life in prison for 7 mob murders, along with other crimes. He was serving his sentence at the ADX Florence, where he died at the age of 90. Moving on to number 4, we have El Chapo. Joaquin Guzman, otherwise known as El Chapo, was a leader of a huge drug cartel. In fact, the US Justice Department described it as one of the world's most prolific, violent, and powerful drug cartels. Now, he was given the name El Chapo because that means shorty, and Guzman is only 5'6". In 2014, Joaquin claimed that he killed anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 people. Now, here's the thing, Joaquin has managed to escape almost every prison that has locked him away. This scared a lot of people. But in 2016, he was recaptured and sent to the States to be tried for a federal charge. He was found guilty and locked away at ADX Florence in solitary confinement, where he has yet managed to escape. In our 3rd spot, we have Mark David Chapman. I'm sure a lot of you know about him because he is the man who murdered John Lennon. Rest in peace. On December 8th, 1980, Chapman waited outside of Lennon's Manhattan apartment for him to come down. When he did, he shot him 4 times in the back. Apparently he did so because of Lennon's immense fame. As a result, he was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. He is currently held in solitary confinement in the Wendy Correctional Facility in upstate New York. The only outside interaction he gets is from his wife once a year and occasional visits from his sister and a few friends. He is part of the family reunion program, so this allows him up to 48 hours alone with his wife in his specially built prison home. That's where he will spend the rest of his life until he dies. In our 2nd spot, we have the Unabomber. The Unabomber is the name given to Ted Kaczynski, as he was responsible for numerous mail bombings on innocent people. Apparently, Ted is a very intelligent individual. He skipped 6th grade, has an IQ of 167, and went to Harvard. It's a shame that he didn't put his intelligence to good use. Ted was responsible for sending 16 homemade bombs in the mail that killed 3 individuals and injured 23. As a result, he was charged with 3 counts of homicide and was sentenced to 8 lifetimes in prison. According to another prison inmate, he described Ted as being very weird. Apparently, he won't even go outside when he is allowed to. He spent 24 hours of his day locked away by will. But he was used to it and didn't mind it, since before being placed in solitary confinement, he spent his time in his 12 by 10 foot cabin. And in our number 1 spot, we have Charles Harrelson. Charles Harrelson was an American hitman and organized crime figure, but some of you may know him better as Woody Harrelson's father. Yes, beloved actor Woody Harrelson had a father who was a cold-blooded killer, but he was just 7 at the time when his father first went to prison. While it's said that he was responsible for the deaths of at least 20 people. In 1979, that is when Charles committed his biggest kill of all time. He took out a federal judge by the name of Judge John H. Wood Jr., the first federal judge to be killed in the 20th century. He was paid $250,000 to kill off Judge John. It was because a drug dealer was about to be sentenced by this judge, who was known as Maximum John because he always gave out really harsh punishments to drug dealers. So he got Charles to knock him off for him, but this landed him behind bars and in solitary confinement. He was there until he was 69 years old when he died from a heart attack.